praise you. We honor you on this Thursday morning. And Lord, it is an honor to come before you and then to be together with brothers and sisters today. Lord, as always, we need you above everything else, above any training, and we're thankful for it. But above any training, above anything, Lord, that would be external, we are needing you, especially internally, that you would renew us and strengthen us. Guide us in these days, Lord. Help us to be fruitful, and that, Lord, help us to be confident in the fruitfulness that we do not even see. And that we keep planting, we keep spreading the seed of the gospel, because that's what this world needs the most. So bless this time, bless Dr. Sherwood as he shares. And again, Lord, may we continue to be unified in the Spirit and keep moving forward as you lead us to do so in these days. In your name, amen.
Amen. Well, hey, I want to thank Dr. Crump for allowing me access to all of you. He has been a mentor of mine from a distance for quite some time. When I started in 1999 in Decatur, I was kind of adopting along the way. I've done this my whole ministry. I've adopted along the way some mentors from a distance where they didn't even know they were mentoring me, but they kind of latched on and thought, I'm going to watch what these leaders do. And when he came to Decatur, I don't remember what year he came to Decatur. It was early 2000s probably.
Yeah, I don't even remember. It was a long time ago.
And that was probably the closest Nazarene church to Bloomington, other than the Bloomington churches, but it was on a different district. But I watched what he tackled there in Decatur, watched from a distance, called him on the phone maybe a couple times during those years, and I really appreciated his ministry, his orthodoxy, his commitment to holiness, and he's been, when he was elected DS of your district, I could not have been happier, and he's been an incredible teammate on our team of district superintendents. I think as you're getting to know him, you're recognizing all that. So I don't think I can offer you better leadership on the Northwestern Illinois district, but if you'd like to live somewhere with high taxes and low government services, we should have a conversation. So how's that for a sales pitch? Joel Parsons is from our district. So here's the thing. I think you've got a few of our people held captive over there. We might need to get some players to be named later. Gary Davies served on our district at Peoria First, also planted a church. And so Todd married a girl that we claim is from our district, from Pekin First. I don't know if she claims to be from our district, but we claim her. But Sonia was a very, very good friend of mine in junior high, believe it or not. And I had very few friends in junior high. So she did the Lord's work there, being my friend. But man, it's great to see you all. Jason, I know we've worked together on a couple projects, and my daughter and Todd's stepson are in City on the Hill together. So I kind of feel like I'm home here. I know enough of you that there's some faces that I'm used to associating with SWID that I don't see, because everybody moves over time, over the years. But I'm glad that we're in this together. I really think, as I look at our region, that your district and our district are probably more similar than most of the districts on the region. You're primarily a rural district. You don't have a major metropolitan area on your district. Neither do we. Our churches are just rock solid, mission supporting, theologically conservative, very evangelical bunches. And I get the idea that the district culture of SWID is very similar. You outdo us in a lot of respects, but we're trying to catch up. So we're thankful for you. I'm going to jump right into what Dr. Crump and I talked about, and that is this idea of hyper shepherding. And that term is just something we made up going into COVID. It hasn't really caught on, but most of the stuff I make up doesn't. But it has been a good guide for us in terms of mobilizing our pastors to kind of have an idea what to do during COVID. So when we started in March, having to move away from in-person services, we put out a challenge to our pastors to consider this a time when hyper shepherding becomes critically important. We encourage them to make phone calls to every single household in their church that first week or two to redouble the efforts of communication going out from the church. Because if we weren't going to meet in a crowd, there's an awful lot of relationship, there's an awful lot of contact and sense of togetherness that happens in the crowd that we weren't going to have. And so if our churches were going to hang together, if you remember, and I'm sure you do, it was kind of traumatic, this thought that all of a sudden we weren't going to have Sundays or weekends to be together. And we were really scrambling. There was a lot of energy and anxiety, and usually anxious energy is going to turn in really dark directions, or we can decide we're going to take that extra energy and we're going to turn it in a positive direction. And so hyper shepherding for us was something that gave us the opportunity to turn our own energy in a positive direction, and then also to create connections with our people so that their anxious energy had an outlet, had somewhere to go. And what we found is our folks have really hung together. I think it's been the story across the church. For all hand-wringing we do about not discipling very well as churches, man, our people, when they couldn't get from the church what they were accustomed to getting from the church, they kept right on giving. They stayed engaged. They kept finding ways to serve. And I've just been blown away at the level of support that continues to pour in from our people who have nothing to show for it. For all those weeks, they weren't getting anything from the church they were used to getting, and yet they continued to offer offerings and service and engagement to the church. So I don't know about you, but my view of our lay people and my view of how we're doing in discipleship has gone way up during this season, because I've seen how our people have responded to the adversity. Now, that's not to say everybody's been a perfect soldier. In our experience on our district, the regathering of the church has been way harder than the shutting down or whatever we called the dispersal of the church. Our people held together really well under adversity. As it turns out, adversity is a lot easier to weather than disunity. When people started, when we started trying to regather, we had to figure out how we were going to regather. And then masks or no masks, distancing. You guys probably didn't experience that with your people because they're all sanctified. But boy, we've had some pastors who've really been through the ringer on really hardened, entrenched opinions. Not just that, hey, this is what I'm going to do, but if you don't do it, something's wrong with you. And the pastors are just trying to do the work of the Lord, caught in the middle. Anybody experience any of that? And that's I don't think that's going away anytime real soon. But we've talked to our pastors and basically said, I don't think there's a win in the current moment. I don't think we win this. I think the win in this current season is to endure and come out on the other side with relationships intact as much as possible, and with the church having done the things that the church is built to do, and which brings us right back to shepherding. So let's talk shepherding for a few minutes. I'm gonna mess around. Can I be a co-host so I can share a document here in a minute?
Okay. Well, yeah. Let me. Let's see. Where do I do that?
I won't be sharing it right away, so I'll keep right on rolling here.
You keep rolling. Let me.
So here's what I think I discovered during COVID is about our mission, that when we couldn't meet in crowds anymore, we were a little desperate to wonder, well, does that mean the church doesn't exist during this time? How does the church exist if we can't meet in crowds? But the thing is, we all understand that drawing crowds isn't our mission. Drawing crowds has never been our mission. It's never going to be our mission. It's a method that we use in order to draw people toward the mission. So what's the mission? to make Christ-like disciples in the nations. And we gather together in a large crowd because methodologically we've decided, you know what, that's a good opportunity for us to get people in one place where we can kind of coax them or draw them into next steps of discipleship and mission and service in their community. We can help people take better next steps more effectively if we draw them in crowds. So we lost that method, and it was that method that had been feeding everything else we did. In fact, that method of drawing crowds has become so central to our methodology that it has become, in large part, our primary measure of who we are as a church. When somebody says, "Hey, I have a church of 50," well, what do they mean by that? Do they have 50 people that they have determined are Christ-like disciples, or they have 50 people who show up when the crowd gathers? Normally, it's the 50 people who show up when the crowd gathers, and that's become our primary measurement. It's our primary methodology. And so what happens when something is our primary methodology and our primary measurement, it's really easy for us to begin acting as if and thinking as if that's our mission. And so the state steps in and takes that away from us, or community realities take that away from us. And all of a sudden we wonder, do we still exist? Who are we apart from that? And so I think God could use this season to really help us get an idea, a better distinction, an idea of what are methods and what's the mission. So if we were never able to draw large crowds again, and as our churches have regathered, some of our churches are running 25% of what they were running pre-COVID as far as the crowd. Some of them are running 75%. Most of them are somewhere in between. We've got 4 or 5 churches right now who are not meeting in person because of positive COVID cases on staff or in their congregation. So they just shut it down for a week or two, and we'll come back together. So who are we when we're not in a crowd? Well, we're still the body of Christ, and we still have the opportunity to maintain connections. So what is it? How do we go about doing that? I have a feeling that it's going to be a long time before the crowds are what they were. And it's possible that in some churches, it'll never be the case where the crowds are again what they were. I don't think COVID's going to last forever. I don't think we're approaching anything close to a new normal. I hate that phrase, as a matter of fact. I don't use the word hate very often, but this phrase of, nobody said that recently in your midst. I don't hate people who say it. I just refuse to accept it at this point, that we're approaching that this is going to be a new normal. There's nothing normal about what we've been through. The governmental response to it hasn't been normal. COVID's not normal. And us wearing masks and staying 6 feet away from everybody else, and that's not normal, and it's not going to be something we have to do forever. I just don't think it is. But what will normal look like on the other side of this? It will probably be different than what normal has looked like up to now. So what's that going to be, and how do we maintain our function as the body of Christ if the crowd really isn't as effective at being our primary methodology as it used to be? That's a good question for us to think about, and I think it's going to depend on shepherding. How do we disciple people if not in crowds? Well, we'll have to find other ways to disciple people then, because our mission is still the mission. We're still called to make Christ-like disciples in the nation. So how would we do that if there were no large crowd gatherings to use as the primary methodology from which all the other methods draw? So let me leave that there for now, and talk to you about 1991. I started full-time ministry in 1991. And I realize, as young as I look, it's hard for you to imagine that I've been at it that long. But I really did start in 1991. I was 21 years old, and we were taught during the era I came up in. We were taught that we need to look at being ranchers, not shepherds, and that anybody who was determined just to be a shepherd was never going to pastor a church of probably much over 50. unless they were just like super shepherds, and then maybe they could hit 100. I happened to observe some pastors who were great shepherds, and I served under some pastors who were very good shepherds as an associate pastor, who were in the 200 and sometimes up to 300 range, but they were super shepherds. I mean, they were like off the charts, like LeBron James, Michael Jordan kind of pastors. And so I certainly wouldn't think that everybody in that model would ever get to that place, but that's kind of what we were taught. Do you remember that terminology, Tim, of ranchers, not shepherds?
Yes, and you are now the host. Okay, so anything you want to put up.
All right. I discovered recently that I can actually rename people when I'm the host. So watch your name tag there, because it could change at any time. Um, all right, so this model of ranchers versus shepherds really was front and center for us, and I think there is some credibility to it, because primarily we're not called to be just a shepherd. We're called to equip the saints for works of ministry. So there is definitely something to that idea, that if a church is going to reach beyond that one ring of followers, we're going to have to raise up leaders from amongst the followers to be leaders to everybody else. What happened, though, I think, and what I observed in other pastors and what I felt attention in myself, was that pastors started trying to lead their churches of 25, 50, and 150 as if they would lead a church of 1,000 or more. And there's that old maxim, dress for the job you want. I think pastors kind of decided, if I'm going to pastor a church of 1,000, I better start acting like the pastor of a church of 1,000. Well, that sounds kind of harmless and actually kind of sensical. But what happened was, I think that many pastors started trying to lead their churches of 25, 50, 150 as if it was a church of 1,000. So they withdrew from doing all the things that small churches can do better than large churches, but they still were utterly unable to offer all the things that large churches can do better than small churches. So what did their people get? They got the worst of both worlds. They got the mega church, only worse, only smaller. And so we had a season there, I think, where there was some real tension around pastoral ministry and between congregations, boards, and pastors, because we had a lot of pastors, one of many reasons, we had a lot of pastors who were pulling back from the kinds of things that small churches are actually way better at than large churches. Here's the thing about becoming a church of 1,000. The things you do to get there aren't going to be what gets you beyond that. So you have to pastor the church you have, not the church you wished you had. I've got to pastor the people I actually have, not the people I wished I had. And I've got to start where I am. If I try to start a journey where I'm not, that just is, it makes my head hurt even thinking about that possibility. I mean, we'd have to go to the Matrix or some kind of Star Trek thing in order to start somewhere besides where we are. And so we might as well settle in and be okay with where we are and who we are, and start where we're at. And if we want to take a journey, we figure out, okay, what's going to help me get to the next step? Not how do I just decide to act as if I'm already at the destination. Hey, can I admit Brian Thompson into the room?
Yes,
Is he a safe person?
he's great.
All right, he's in. So when I started my first pastorate in 1999, I was caught between these two models. So I didn't want to get so enmeshed in the urgencies of individual people's lives that I couldn't give the kind of overall leadership necessary to move the whole church forward. I was wary of becoming so enmeshed that my overall effectiveness was compromised. But also in my heart, I wanted to be the kind of shepherd for my people that my pastors had been to me. And so I was running around, hustling. I started with a group of about 100 people in my first lead pastorate. I'd been a youth pastor at larger churches, and started at Bloomington First in April of '99 with 100 folks, and we just kind of went at it. And we gradually grew, one family, one household at a time. It was a hustle. I mean, it was just as you know, pastoral ministry is that way. And sometimes you pour an awful lot into people, and they come along with you for a few steps, and then they just check out on you. They ghost you. That's what my kids call it now. I didn't have that terminology, but I've been ghosted many, many, many times in ministry, where you pour your heart and soul into people. You're there for them when they desperately need you. You celebrate next steps with them, and then all of a sudden they're gone. Like, thanks, but no thanks. Anybody else experience that, or am I the only one that drives people off like that? That's exhausting. It's heartbreaking in ministry, that and yet we were able to hang on to more than we lost. And little by little, as the church grew, I found myself with this shepherding. I had decided I've got to find a way to be a rancher, but until I get there, I got to just be a shepherd. I got to do what I can actually do. And so I was getting tired. I had this constant kind of dark cloud of undefined expectations hanging over my head, that the more people we reach, the more people we gather in, the more work there is for me to do. And I don't know how I'm going to keep up with it all. And so there's part of me that kind of didn't want to grow much more. I went through seasons like that because the more people we have, the more problems. More people, more problems. I think rappers talk about more money, more problems. Pastors talk about more people, more problems. And do I really want more problems? And it really ends up becoming kind of a subconscious self-defeating thought pattern, where we kind of mutes our best intentions and our best efforts to reach out to people, because in the back of our mind is, if I reach these people, they're going to bring all their problems into the church, and I'm going to have more problems to deal with. And so there's that place where you kind of get maxed out. And I had this constant sense that I wasn't doing enough for people, even the people I already had. But yet I didn't have a clear definition of what enough would be. Like, what am I supposed to do in these people's lives? When do they expect me to show up? When is it helpful for them, for me to show up? How often? That weighed heavy. I was a rookie lead pastor. I didn't mention this to you, but I served under 5 different lead pastors as an associate pastor, and 3 out of the 5 ended up divorced and out of ministry. And so I knew there was something about the model of ministry that I had caught, that I had learned, that was not sustainable. And I was definitely feeling that unsustainability. So I had a conversation with a gentleman in our church who was an ER doctor. And I said, hey, how do you guys not get sued or not end up with unhappy patients? If anything goes wrong in their treatment, how do you just not get sued by everybody? Because the ER, you got all kinds of people coming in with all kinds of situations, and how in the world does an ER doctor have any idea what's really going on? And how can they possibly be expected to catch everything that might be important to catch in order to know how to treat that person? So say the person comes in and they got a tumor or something, and the ER doctor misses it. How are they not on the hook for that? And that's the kind of feelings I had as a pastor. Like, how can I possibly get to a place where I know I'm doing for people what I'm supposed to be doing? And he said, we don't have to worry about that, because as long as we follow the protocols, a suit against us won't stand. We'll know we did what we were supposed to do. I said, well, how do you know which protocol to follow? He said, well, we can only respond to the presenting symptoms, to the presenting situation. And so if based on the presenting symptoms, we run the right tests and we give the right response, we're in the clear. It's all because there are established protocols for how to respond to the whole range of presenting symptoms. And I got to thinking after that conversation, I wonder if there's a possibility that in the church, in shepherding and pastoring, if there could be care protocols based on these presenting symptoms. Here's how we're going to respond. Based on these life situations, here's what they need from the pastor, and here's what I want to offer as a pastor. And so we began talking as a very small staff at our church. By this time, we were probably running 150, 175, and and I could feel that we were maxed out, like the whole 80-20 thing. The 20% of the people that were doing the work of the church were maxed out, taking care of the other 80%, and they weren't going to be able to reach more people effectively or accomplish much more unless somehow we could push out of that 20-80 sticking point balance that we were in. And so we started talking about standards of care, about care protocols. And I began thinking, I hadn't done a lot of visitation as a pastor at this point. We were having a hard time getting that 20-80 split to not kill us. If we could have just gotten to 30-70 or 40-60, think of how much more work we could accomplish and how many more people we could reach. But we couldn't get there. So we had this issue of not being able to recruit enough workers to help us reach more people, and we didn't have the capacity on staff or our key lay leaders to reach any more people because we had our hands full with the people we'd already reached, and so we were at an impasse. And so this conversation with this ER doctor got me thinking about these standards of care protocols. Could there be such a thing in ministry? So I sat down and I did the math that if I was going to offer a level of care to everyone in my congregation that would be beyond what I've been offering and would be maybe beyond what reasonably anybody could ever expect, what would that be? And so I decided at that point we had about, believe it or not, I think around 300 households that considered us their church home. So we're running 175, but it's about 300 households who were coming often enough and we knew considered us to be their church home. So how could I offer a level of care? And so we just thought about, I sat down one day, I did the math. How long would it take me to contact every household every month by phone, and every quarter by a card, by a written note, and every year by a personal visit to the household, or either to the household or with the household at a neutral location, like a third location. And you wouldn't believe when I did the math, how long it would take to hit 300 houses with a phone call every month. There's 30 days in a month. There's about 20 available work days that aren't consumed by other things. So that would be about 15 calls a day when I'm working, to make a monthly phone call. 15 calls a day. Now, what I found was most people don't answer their phone. And so I'm able to leave a message. It takes all of about 20 seconds for most of those phone calls for me to call and say, hey, thinking about you today, praying for you. And that ends up, those 15 phone calls a day would take somewhere around 30 to 45 minutes out of my day. That's a sizable chunk to every day, but I spend 30 to 45 minutes in a lot of ways every day that are way less productive than that. And so the thought that I could contact every single household in my church, this was 300 households, every month by a phone call, and it would only take me about 30 to 45 minutes a day to do that. Now, some of those calls end up being longer, and so that's something that I had to work into my estimates just from experience, because you know pretty quick you come to learn who are the people who aren't going to let me off the phone. And so those are people you don't call until you've only got 10 minutes till your next appointment. And then you've got a hard end of that phone call. I mean, there are things we can do to guard against those few who are going to keep us on the phone as long as they possibly can. But that's not most people. Most people don't want to be on the phone with me very long. And it may just be me, but I tend to think that's normally the case. And then a quarterly card, how long does it take to write a note? So that would be 300 households. If I've got about 60 work days in a quarter, and so that's about 5 notes a day. How long does it take to write 5 notes? I could do 5 notes in probably 30 minutes. And I had an office secretary who would put the addresses and stamps on the notes for me. In fact, she started producing the notes ahead of time for me, so I would have a stack on my desk, and it would already be addressed and stamped. I just write the note, put it in the card, give it back to her to mail out, and that took all of about 30 minutes a day. And then I made sure that once a year, so I thought about how long would it take me to have an in-person visit, say a 60 to 90-minute visit once a year with each one of these 300 households. And that that ended up looking like that would be the toughest part. And that's about 5 or 6 visits a week for that year, maybe 7 visits a week. What I found was people don't want a 60 to 90-minute visit from me, most of them. Most of them were much shorter than that. And some of them I could double up on. And these are household visits, not individual visits. And most of them didn't want me coming to their house necessarily. And so we would just find a time to do a breakfast or a lunch. And I found that I could connect meaningfully with each household outside of our regular services once a year. And it took me the equivalent of about 4 to 5 hours a week to plug that in. So I could offer this level of shepherding, every household a phone call every month, every household a card every quarter, and every household a visit every year, an in-person visit. And I could do that for about an extra, if you combine, take that 4 or 5 hours a week down to daily, on average, I'm looking at about 2 hours a day that I would devote to shepherding. I ran across during this season something from Stan Toller, and he called it 90-minute a day care. And he broke it down similarly, where he devoted 90 minutes a day just to shepherding. And he had a similar thing that included a lunch with somebody and writing cards and making phone calls. And that was instructive to me. So when I sat down and did the math, I realized, I've been living with this dark cloud of unmet expectations, undefined expectations over my head. And once I sat down and did the math, it wasn't that tough. I could devote that time if I just decided to do it and got systematic about it. And what I found is that if I'll be cold-blooded, calculated, systematic in my approach to pastoral care, I'm a lot more effective at offering the kind of personal, warm, spontaneous relationship that everybody seeks from their pastor. They don't, and that's the way it is with the ER too. When you walk into an ER and you've got presenting symptoms, the warmth and the personal care is made possible because they are so cold-blooded and calculated in preparing for that encounter. I mean, they've got so much organization and so much thought that goes into how they handle patients. So many protocols, but your experience when you go in, if they're doing their job well, is much more personal. You receive that quality attention from a qualified practitioner because of all the systems they have set up to be ready to receive you and respond to your situation. So let me share this spreadsheet with you, and then I'll run through this real quick, and then let's just talk. And you may be sitting back thinking, this guy's needs to be put out to pasture because he's off his rocker, and that's totally okay. And you very well may be right. And some days the pasture doesn't sound too bad. All right. Let's see. Share screen. All right. If you will let me know if I need to make this a lot larger. I do need to make that a lot larger text, don't I?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We're going to zoom in here. Is that a little bit better?
Yes.
We need to go a little bit bigger.
Be good.
I'm not sure if we can. Oh, wait, I can. Yeah, let's start here. And let's see if I can. How's that?
Good.
All right. So here's this is our shot at standards of care or care protocols. Use your phrase. So every household in the church gets these 3 things I already talked to you about. But then there are other classifications of people in the church, and we just developed this as we thought of them. So as we had situations come up, we thought, okay, how should we respond to that type of situation in the future? So department leaders were important to us. We want to empower our leaders, care for our leaders. So we decided A regular meeting time with our department leaders would be a part of our care to them. We went to a quarterly pattern of board meetings where we would have board meetings every month, but and this was several years in. So this is when we were through the initial chaos, and we had gotten to a place where we were operating on more important matters than urgent matters. And so we went to a 3-month cycle of board meetings where 1 month of the quarter we would do business, 1 month we devoted entirely to prayer, and 1 month we devoted to what we called leadership community, where we brought in all of our department heads and our staff as well as our board together, and we did leadership learning and listening to each other. And that was the only time those three groups were in one room together, and that really was life-giving to us. But our department leaders, including staff, we would have a regular meeting time, send them a small thank you gift annually, and then paid conference. We decided that our laymen who lead departments, we ought to invest in as if they're paid staff, because we got more bang for the buck out of volunteer department leaders than we did out of full-time paid staff. And so we thought, man, that's such a small amount of money compared to paying a salary, to invest in their leadership, to give them what they need to work with, to invest in their development, that it became a no-brainer for us to pay for a conference at least once a year for these department leaders. Team or group leaders and lay pastors, we would have a quarterly leaders meeting for them. We would individually feature them in a newsletter or a service annually. In other words, tell the story of what they're doing to the rest of the church. It's amazing how cared for people feel when they're celebrated. People love to be celebrated. And then we also wanted to make sure that our department leaders were offering care to them. So this is in addition to the care they receive from their leaders, their department leaders. So all of our team and group leaders and lay pastors were serving under a department. Workers, so that's just people who volunteer at any level of the church. We want to give them a personal thanks from the pastor at every monthly, quarterly, or yearly contact. So when I'm doing the every household contacts, if I'm talking to somebody who I know volunteers as a first impressions worker, then when I'm in my conversation with them or writing a note to them, maybe that's what I write the note about. Maybe that's what I call them on the phone about. Hey, thanks for doing this. Hey, I know this came up. How'd that go? So I can offer them care in conjunction with their ministry role. So that's our care protocol for workers. And then people in the nursing home. We decided that we had a team of lay pastors who were very motivated, and so they would get a weekly visit from a lay pastor and then a monthly pastoral visit. And so as our staff grew, that became the lead pastor on some months and the other pastors other months. But monthly, they would get at least one visit from a pastor. And then homebound people, this would be in addition to a weekly lay pastor visit. They would get a monthly pastoral visit. Now, some people are homebound only as it pertains to church. Have you discovered this? You have people who can't get to church, but you see them at Walmart and you see them at the restaurant and you see them everywhere else in town, but they're homebound when it comes to church. So we just decided we're not gonna fight that battle. If they think they're homebound, we're gonna treat them. We're gonna put them in this category and consider them homebound. And then pregnant people. We decided we equipped our nursery director to initiate a relationship with them during their pregnancy to get ready to make them comfortable with coming into the nursery once their baby was born. We found when we engaged our nursery director with pregnant ladies while they were pregnant, their babies were much younger when they began to feel comfortable bringing them to the nursery. And then also we'd send them a note as soon as we found out they were pregnant, just celebrating that with them. So then newborns through 9 months, we visit the hospital and deliver a nursery ministry welcome packet at the hospital that welcomes them into the nursery ministry of the church. Collected basic info for a publication to celebrate the birth. The pastor, as pastor, I wrote a letter to the baby, and it was amazing the impact that had. That the baby got a letter from the pastor. I mean, who's that helping? The baby doesn't care, but it's helping the parents. And then we initiate discussion about dedication, and then double check on if they needed meals. And so that was so. When somebody had a new baby, I didn't have to have this undefined dark cloud of expectation over my head for a month, wondering if I did enough for them. I knew what we were going to do, and I knew whether we did it or not. When somebody was going to have surgery, we'd ask if they wanted a pastor there. Most people these days, I find, don't want a pastor there necessarily. We were decided we would be there if they did, and then we'd make an extra call to their spouse, the spouse of the person having surgery, just to check in on the spouse and to check in on how that person is doing and what they really need. Hospitalized, daily visit, what I found was, as the church grows, the lead pastor doesn't necessarily need to be the one to be there every day. A lay pastor can do it, a staff pastor can do it, but and no matter how large the church was that I pastored, I never pastored super large churches, but I would be there. I tried to be there at least once while they were in the hospital, and then we would fill in the rest of their care with lay pastors and staff pastors. But I still tried to get there once myself while they were in the hospital. Then short-term ill, you kind of would have to define that, how it works for you. But a weekly phone call and reminding them that they're on the prayer list. Long-term ill, these are people who aren't quite homebound, but they've got a long-term chronic kind of lingering illness. And we would get to make these regular contacts and follow up on the last news. So basically, we would care for them just like we did every other household. But in those contacts, make sure we followed up on their illness and asked them how, if there's any progress, and then remind them that they're on our prayer list. Grieving people, here's what we do there. I won't go through that in detail, but how we follow up people, I found in my pastoral ministry that I was really good the week of the death and the funeral. I mean, I was right on it. I went to their house. I listened to stories. I got ready for the funeral. And then after that funeral, I kind of felt like, oh, that's done. But I learned from others that caring for the grieving family in that year following the loss can provide so much potential for helping them move ahead spiritually, and is really, really important to them. So those are some things that we do there. And I'm going to share this file with you by the time we're done. Crisis confidential. So when somebody goes through something you can't share with anybody, we try to just make sure we were responsive to them and follow up about a month after the crisis, and then treat them like we did every other person, unless they ended up in one of these other categories. Seniors, we had a monthly seniors luncheon, so we attended that, and then would host the senior adults in my home. So I'd actually invite them to my house once a year, not always as one big group, but in groupings. So seniors kind of the seniors basically cluster into smaller groups anyway, so you kind of know who their social groupings are. Military people, we would just, and we learned this the hard way, because we had people go off to the military and go off to college, and we missed them. Like, we didn't do much for them. And I found out that that caused hurt in some cases, and it definitely left them untouched by the church for long periods of time. And what we had to do in our database, we had a database that treated everybody as part of a household, is as soon as somebody went to the military or went to college, we separated them out from their household and made them their own household. That way, when we generated lists, they would show up as a household and they would get the same care. So as soon as somebody goes to the military or goes to college, they become their own household, even if they have the same address as another household in the church. And we make the phone calls to them, write the notes to them as if they are their own separate household. And that made all the difference in the world for our connection with the military. And you know who is really affected by our contacts on military people and college students, is their families of origin. They're the ones who are super blessed by that. And then it keeps us in their life so that when they do go through some critical moments, they've got us to think about calling and reaching out to for support. So there's some stuff we did for college. We separated, again, we learned this the hard way, because we had college kids who went to other schools or stayed home for college that fell off our radar. They were still part of their parents' household, but we lost touch with them. And so we decided to start treating them as their own household, even if they still lived at home and they were going to school in town. And that really helped us. Then there's more categories that we identified but never developed a care protocol for. and you'll probably have a lot of those too. That people are going to go through these experiences. So how should the church respond to that? And what's the pastor's part to play? Then the other sheets in this just give you a place to make a list. Who are our department heads? And so I've got a list here, and I can even go off to the right and have date by date. I cleaned this sheet up so that it wasn't. So this is a template. This isn't actually a working sheet. Team, you can list off your team and group leaders. So this would be your Sunday school teachers, your small group leaders, those kind of folks. Your workers. So you have a sheet where you can list everybody that falls into every category. And this approach to pastoral care, again, ends up taking the pastor about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. But you can offer a level of care to people that I'm pretty sure they're not going to get from any mega church or any other church in town. And it's the level of care that isn't going to dominate your life. I always had this feeling like if I offered the level of care to my people that maybe I felt like they might have wanted, that it would totally dominate my life and ministry, and I would never be able to lead my whole church forward until I sat down and did the math and realized I could exceed expectations, and it's only going to take me about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. And boom, we were off to the races. And remember I talked to you about that 80-20 split? You can't move forward because the 20% of the people doing the ministry are totally maxed out with the 80% they're ministering to. It was amazing to me when we implemented this. Within a few months, recruitment went through the roof. We actually had a waiting list for some ministry roles, and it was like heaven on earth all of a sudden, where people started, like when I called somebody to do something, people stopped saying no to me. I was getting like yeses as a percentage of my asks, double and triple at the rate that I would have previously. And I think what happened was when people feel that loved and personally invested in by their pastor, guess what their answer is going to be when the pastor then calls and asks them to do something? It's amazing. So you could do this from a completely manipulative point of view. Like if I do all these things, I'm going to get a lot more yeses when it comes to recruiting people to do ministry. I don't encourage you to be manipulative about it because I don't think you can sustain this level of care if it's self-centered or manipulative. But one of the byproducts is we moved a lot of the 80% into the 20%. And that gave us the ability to reach a lot more people. I think our percentage probably still stayed at 20-80. But as you can move people from the 80% and get them to be 20%ers, the ability of that 20%, their capacity to reach others grows. And so your 80-20 split now is much bigger than it was before you started this level of care. But it was amazing to me on recruitment phone calls, asking people to do stuff, how hard it was for people to say no to me once we got going on this. And I like that. I like when, everybody, these books that say people need to learn how to say no. I don't know about you, but I think people are pretty good at saying no. I have heard it a lot in my ministry and in my life. And I'm looking for people that like to say yes. And that's the kind of pastor I want to be. So it's the kind of shepherd I want to be. All right. You've heard me rattle on here for plenty of time. So I'll turn it over to Pastor Tim, back to Pastor Tim, and anything that you want to ask or that we want to talk about, any pushback that you might have. You can totally throw me under the bus. You can offend me, and you don't have to see me next week or next month. So don't hold back. You might actually help me fine tune and shape, or maybe even toss out some stuff that needs to get tossed out. So don't hold back on any questions or pushback.
So yeah, let's go ahead. Let's start with questions. You can either text, put them in the chat section, or you can also just verbalize, unmute yourself and go.
Did you say you were going to make that a file available to us?
Yeah. Can I do that through Zoom, or should I just send that to Dr. Crump?
just send it to me and I can get it out. I'll also post it. I'll post it this afternoon sometime on the district website under resources. Okay. His recording will also be there. Okay.
I appreciate it. I think it's a great tool, and kind of listening to your story, I can resonate with that as being in my first lead pastorate, trying to figure out how to balance all of the things that go into pastoral ministry. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. I'm excited to kind of dig into it and go over it with our leadership.
Wonderful. Who was that talking just now?
So that was Jason Riggle.
Jason. All right, great. I was looking around at all the videos and nobody's mouth was moving. I see you now, Jason.
Scott, I've heard you talk about that a little bit in the past, but I didn't realize just how organized you really were with that. That was really impressive and really helpful. Thank you for going through that.
Hey, thank you, Joel. I would encourage all of us, when we think a problem is insurmountable, to sit down and calmly do the math. Sometimes is a real breakthrough. And it sure was for me in pastoral care, and it has been in a lot of other things. I've been in district level meetings as a pastor where we would spend literally half a day mostly complaining about all the other churches and pastors that weren't stepping up and doing what they're supposed to do. If we would have spent 30 minutes of that time just calling all those board secretaries or pastors or NYI presidents and asking them to do what we were complaining for hours that they weren't doing, we would have had a breakthrough. And so sometimes our boards, our local church boards can be this way too, where we can talk about a problem and think of all the man hours that are going into talking about that problem. We spent an hour talking about a problem as a board. There's 10 people on the board. That's 10 hours of work. What if we just decided, hey, let's just break up here for 15 minutes and make these calls and then come back and see what we have to work with. I'm guessing we would have some real breakthroughs, and just by doing the math.
Hey, Scott, I've got a question, and I'm sure you had some people that needed extra grace. And at least in my pastoral ministry, there were times that I would want to avoid those folks, okay? Or people maybe who left the church. I just said, well, if they left or they haven't been there in a while, any thoughts, perspectives, anything, insights that you've learned in pastoral ministry of those kind of situations, advice you'd give our pastors?
Rick Warren in his small group training talks about EGRs, that every group has one. Extra EGRs, extra grace required. And he said every single group has an EGR. And if you don't know who it is, it's you. I thought that was pretty good. Absolutely. Every church has those. In fact, you can only handle so many. But I think there's a constant challenge of giving everything that you have in your heart to give every person, and then making sure that there's enough of you left to lead the whole church forward. And so when you decide not to let an EGR consume your whole day on a regular basis, you're not being selfish. You are acting in the best interest of the whole church. So you can give them. I think you can be high touch as a pastor without getting enmeshed and completely swallowed up in everybody's dysfunction and crisis. And that's a critical thing. Lloyd Brock at Pekin First is just an absolute master. If you're interested in how can I be a high touch shepherd without getting totally sucked into and lost in everybody's dysfunction, call up Lloyd Brock on the phone and say, hey, I heard Scott Sherwood talk, and can you teach me how to be a high touch pastor without getting buried? And he is an absolute master at it. He draws boundaries. He doesn't get sucked into everybody's drama, but he makes the touches he needs to make, and he kind of leaves the touches at that. And so I think with our EGR, sometimes if we think we're going to fix them, we're in for a rude awakening. But we can give them what we determine is in the best interest of the church to give them. I met with a guy named Paul Scott for breakfast about every month or so. And Paul had a traumatic brain injury from an accident when he was a kid, and had become fixated on Revelation. And he was one of these guys that had this whole diatribe that he would, once he got started on it, it was going to finish, and it was long. And it was all about how the people of Israel and prophecy, and he was the Son of God, and he's got to go to the Middle East, and he's got the answer for world peace and world hunger, and man, it was amazingly complex and detailed. And I would meet him periodically for a breakfast, and I tried my hardest to get him on other topics, to talk about other things, and he's a pleasant enough guy until he got on that diatribe. And then it was off to the races. And I walked out of breakfast with him one time, probably my 10th breakfast with him, thinking, Lord, this is absolutely unproductive for your kingdom. There's nothing good being accomplished in Paul's life. There's nothing good being accomplished for the church. I'm not doing this. And I just, is almost audibly, not quite audibly, but almost audibly, I heard God tell me, does he have a soul? And of course the answer is, well, yeah, he's alive, he's human, he's got a soul. But I wasn't connecting with his mind. And I heard God so clearly ask me, is it okay with you if I just occupy your time ministering to his soul, even if you can't fix his mind? And I got in my car, and I'm not a real emotional person, but I was choked up. I thought, okay, Lord, that's okay. I'll do that for you. And so it was periodic. If it was every day, it would have been too much. In my mind, every 6 weeks or so was okay. And so you just kind of have to have a balance of what kind of investment you're willing to make. There are times I look back where I gave too much to the wrong people and not enough to who turned out to be the right people. But I don't know how I could have seen that in the moment. You get a sense, I think, if people are calling you to their home every week or so with a blow up or a crisis, and you can kind of get a sense where they're leaning on me too much and it's not helping them. Then you gotta draw some boundaries. I'll tell you who's good to give you some help in those regards are social workers. If you've got social workers or any helping professionals in your congregation, they can help you understand how to offer care and help without getting sucked in and maintaining healthy boundaries. They're really, really good at it.
Good.
Hey, Scott, I have a question as far as the monthly phone calls that you did. Everybody has their own cell phone now. There aren't very many landlines left, it seems. How did you handle who to contact? When did you alternate, or just kind of case by case, or what was your strategy toward that?
Yeah, for me, it was, of course, we started doing this in a time when most people had landlines. So I would call the family phone number. In the age of cell phones, I would probably be a little bit prone to call the male in the household, and then primarily just because I'm male. But that does create a wrinkle where somebody's got to consider the female in the household, the kids. But if you're going to call them every month, sometimes you can call and say, hey, can I talk to Junior? And you're not going to get much from Junior. Doug Fields, who was a youth pastor guru back in the day, he talked about calling all the junior hires on his list as a youth pastor. And he said he kind of played out the whole conversation, which basically was, hey, this is Pastor Doug. And the response was, hi. Hey, I just wanted to see how you're doing today. You have a good day? Yeah. Got nothing more than one word answers from these kids, and thought that's a waste of time. They hung up the phone though, and he'd get a call back later in the week from a parent out of their minds excited and talking about how thrilled that kid was to get a phone call from their youth pastor. And so the kid's telling of it to the mom was totally different than the youth pastor's experience of it. And so I think, as they're making these household calls once a month, I think if in the age of cell phones, I'd want to always go through, if I'm going to start calling female once a month, to me, that gets a little ticklish. But I can keep the content of that phone call right and make sure that the husband always knows that I'm gonna make a call. It may be that that relationally there are some some norms culturally that we just have to be careful about not crossing. But it definitely makes it a little bit more complex.
Hey, Scott, a couple of the pastors mentioned texting. I think today in our culture, it's probably a good thing, but we've gotten very good in our society of being impersonal in our care. And I think with COVID, it's been one of the challenges. And I really appreciate the way that you have communicated to us today of how to hyper shepherd, because I think churches that would receive that level, I do think there would be a radical change. And I think we have some of that's happening on SWID with some of our pastors. Some of it's innate, some of it's more maybe who they're wired to be. Not everyone's wired to shepherd and care naturally, but I think with you giving tools and emphasizing the intentionality by which you cared for the people God gave you, God obviously blessed you with more. So I think that's a positive thing.
And I tell you what, this is what I shared with you today was a task-oriented person's attempt at being personal. And you can tell I made a task out of it. And so that may not be the best approach for you, but for me, making a task out of it helped me serve people a lot better than if I hadn't made a task out of it. And so that's for sure. And texting, I think, is a great thing to add into the mix. But I tell you what, a handwritten note in the age of texting, I don't think there's ever been a time when handwritten notes were more appreciated than they are now, because they are so rare. We have an opportunity to do some things for people here that no other group or organization on earth is thinking to do. With the handwritten notes, the personal phone calls, and I think with probably 90% of your congregation, you'll begin to get a feel for whether if you're a man, whether it's appropriate to call that particular woman or not. If your relationship and your conversations are always honorable and above board, it makes it a lot easier to make those kind of calls. And it may be that you just bundle them, that instead of making that monthly phone call to that household, is instead of that being a single phone call, maybe in some cases it's a double phone call, but you call the husband first and then say, hey, I'm going to call your spouse, your wife, and as well today. Is that, you could ask if that's okay. Pretty soon you're not going to have to ask that. You just want to make sure that everybody is aware and comfortable with the level of conversation and contact you're having with everybody in the church. But I am very sensitive to crossing those lines. So I think that's something we have to think about. So if you got any thoughts for me on that, on how in the age of cell phones, how often you call spouses of the opposite gender, and how you handle those phone calls, I'd sure be open to them. I think for women pastors, this is an area where it's actually easier. I think women pastors can get by with more than male pastors can when it comes to making these contacts, but maybe not. Maybe I only think that because I'm not a female pastor and I haven't experienced, you call another woman's husband, and that may be even tougher on you than a male pastor calling another man's wife. So I take that back. I don't think it is any easier for female pastors. It might be harder.
Probably not everybody can do this maybe, or it doesn't work for everyone, but one of the things that I've tried to do, because I kind of try to guard those same boundaries as well, is to ask my wife. Sometimes I'll have her make those calls, especially if it's someone that I want to make sure we touch or reach out to. But again, protecting those boundaries, my wife's pretty good about helping me out with that when I need that. So.
Yeah. And now if you text, you can text both of them. So that, texting may be a good answer there. But you'll find out pretty quick who you can call and who you can't.
All right. Any other questions?
There was one comment I thought of. The idea that you have this list gives you that sense of you've done what you've set out to do, so you don't carry the guilt.
Right.
And I know I've been bad about trying to keep track of everything. And of course, I have my wife who comes along and says, "Do you realize what all you're doing?" I said, "I'm not doing much." And she'll list things. It's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." And having this list and having something at least to tell you what you're doing.
Well, it means people won't fall through the cracks as easily because you do have a list. And when you think of them, you can add them to the list. Make sure you give them that level of care. Yeah, it's a great point. And I've been right there with you.
I'm curious how many of our pastors you submit when you're meeting with your board, you provide an accountability report of what you've done, maybe some of the touches. They can't always be maybe people's names, but I sometimes wonder if we do not give enough, I think our people would care more if they know that maybe we're caring. And that was one of the things that I heard Scott talk about. And does anybody report on a monthly basis to your board? I see Jason, Andrew, okay. I would encourage you, if you're not, to start doing some kind of accountability. I think it's always good. Sometimes as pastors, we want everybody to be accountable to us, but we struggle being accountable to others. And all of us are that to whatever extent. Scott and I, we're accountable to our districts, our district advisory board, and also to the jurisdictional general superintendent. And I have to admit, I don't turn in a report to Dr. Graves, and some of it is I think he's overwhelmed, but I think there's some advantages of doing that. So just a thought.
That's good. You got me thinking. I don't do that with my DAB. They have no idea how I spend my time. So that's something I need to start doing. That helps me.
Well, and I don't break it down into hours, but I think it's important. All right, last questions.
Think back to the phone call. My kids call, they'll say, "Turn your speakerphone on, Dad." Or if they call my wife, they say, "Turn your speakerphone on, Mom, so Dad can hear." So I think that's a good option when you're talking to the husband. Is your wife in the room? If so, turn your speakerphone on. I want to talk to both of you.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Well, and I tell you what, to speak love and care into somebody's life, you can do that in 2 or 3 minutes, and it's a powerful impact. So I love that idea, putting them on speaker or FaceTiming. And we can do every phone, I think, now can do 3-way calling, right? Where you can patch a third person in. So yeah, there may be some technology answers for the problems that technology causes. Pretty much all technology does is solve the problems that it caused. Kind of like government.
All right. Hey, Scott, I want to say thank you for being with us. I'd like to have a word of prayer for you. And then I'd like you to, if you would, make me the host. That way I'm able to then stop the recording and post it and do all of those things today. And again, by sometime this afternoon, give me up till about 3 o'clock or so, and I'll get this on the website. And if you would be praying for Dr. Sherwood, he is the chairman of the Board of Trustees at Olivet, and we are facing a very critical time in the juncture of Olivet. in the selection of a new president. Dr. Bowling has led us, and we've gotten pretty comfortable with just excellent leadership by Dr. Bowling. And this is one of many things that Dr. Sherwood's doing. And so in the coming days, if you could pray for him and maybe an executive committee that we have, and that God would be leading this. There's been a lot of prayer that's gone into it, but I want to pray for Dr. Sherwood. And then after that, I'd like just a brief moment or two with you. Again, Scott, thank you. But let's pray. Heavenly Father, it is a blessing to be able to gather with pastors. And Lord, the challenges that we have faced are those that, Lord, you've enabled us by your Spirit to be able to be creative and adaptive. And as a result of that, Lord, our in many ways, I think our care is increased. And especially in those early days, Lord, and I still think of some of our pastors who their people don't have internet, and yet every week they will drive. And one of our pastors drives, Lord, quite a few miles just distributing the resources that he's using, Lord, to communicate and to disciple and to equip his people. And God, I thank you today for Dr. Sherwood and for his ministry. I thank you for the call that you placed upon his life and his willingness to share with us a tool that could really help every one of us be a hyper shepherd of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I pray, Lord, that you'll bless him as he leads his district. I pray, Lord, that as he's the chairman of the board of trustees at Olivet, that, Lord, that you will fill him with your Spirit. And may there be a moment, Lord, for him and the executive board and the trustees, where all of us, it isn't just simply a looking at people's credentials and their history, but there's a moment in which we really do know that this is of God. And God, for every pastor that's here and everyone that'll be listening in the days ahead, I pray, Lord, that this would be a tool that could be used to release them from guilt, but empower them in their church to show the love of Jesus. And may this tool ripple, Lord, to others. And in all things, Lord, we ask that you be glorified. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you again, Dr. Sherwood. We appreciate you and your ministry.
Hey, can I leave you with one real quick parting shot?
Absolutely.
After 12 years at Bloomington First, and preaching my guts out week in and week out, when I left, they had a kind of a going away thing, and they had different people talk about what they remembered from my ministry. And would you know that not one of them talked about how great my preaching was, or something in particular that I preached that changed their life? Every single one of them who spoke at that event was when I showed up in their life. And that was a instructive moment for me. I don't think that discounts the importance of preaching. It's incredibly important. But what people remember and what they consider transformative is us showing up. And that has it's stuck with me, and it has fueled me even in my work right now. So I just want to leave you with that. And be encouraged, because your showing up matters, and it will pay off. So keep showing up. Thank you for showing up, and thank you for being a shepherd, because I that's what's holding the church together right now, and it might be the only thing holding the church together right now. So it's never been more important than it is right now. God bless you. Thank you, Dr. Crump.
Hey, thank you. Excellent. Just a couple things real quick for pastors. I want to